Hello and welcome.
Hello.
Oh yeah, no, I took the old bit, didn't I? What film are we covering today? I know it's a very horny film, Mary. What are we doing?
Extremely horny. We are covering Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992. It was directed by Francis Ford Coppola and is probably one of the horniest vampire movies, and that's saying something, actually.
Absolutely, Keanu Reeves with his excellent British accent as well. Best British accent in history, in fact.
He got so much shit for that accent when that movie came out. I kind of feel bad for him just from doing research, like the level of like trash he got from people. And I remember it from the time too, because that was sort of the beginning of that weird mid 90s period where everyone made fun of Keanu Reeves right up until The Matrix, and then everybody liked him again.
Yeah, yeah. I love Keanu. I really don't stand for much Keanu slander. And to be honest, to be brutally honest, I didn't think it was that bad. As a British person who's watched a lot of American media, I have seen and experienced a lot of worse British accents than that. So, all you Keanu haters, you could suck it.
That's
Uh,
right. Yeah, wait, Winona Ryder got a little bit of crap for her accent in the movie as well, but poor Keanu definitely took the brunt of it, and I feel bad because, like, from what I'd read, and I did check this out on IMDb as well, he was exhausted when he made that movie because he had just come off of the year before. He'd made, I think it was 4 movies, which is a lot for anyone. Like, his schedule at that time was wild, so
yeah,
in his own words, he had said that by the time he got to that movie, he really just had nothing left to give because he was so tired. But I don't think his performance is as bad as people made it out at the time. I think it just is hard because it's a flatter part than the rest of them, and everybody else in that movie is so over the top
yeah.
that by comparison, it really just kind of makes him stand out less, I
Yeah,
would say.
yeah, absolutely. This is an interesting one. Like, would you say this is one of, if not the best vampire movie of all time, or is that a bit of a stretch from me?
Oh, I think it's really right up there. It's hard because I'm very partial to the 1994 Interview with the Vampire film. But to be fair, you do not have that film without this one. It was a very direct influence on how Interview with the Vampire was made. So, it's I kind of have to have just, these are probably my top two, I would
Yeah,
say.
yeah, absolutely. And a direct sort of interpretation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. The film is called Bram Stoker's Dracula, taken, of course, taken on by one of the greatest, or arguably one of the greatest directors of all time in Coppola, who would obviously come off, Apocalypse Now. And this is quite an odd, for me, quite an odd take for him. And quite a challenge but it's very goth, very 90s, like we said, very horny. Is this what you would have expected if you were in the writing room with Coppola for him to come up with, Mary?
I feel like I'm not sure. Like the level of horniness in this film is off the charts, but I feel like there's a certain level of larger than life quality to his work that carries through in this one because it is such a like over the top bombastic film, and like all the actors are really just allowed off the leash to be as crazy as they want to be, which I don't know, I feel like that kind of typifies Coppola's work. I mean, and honestly to a certain degree also his nephew Nicolas Cage, because his performances are always very over the top and bombastic as well.
Yeah,
So I don't know, I just think that's just a Coppola boy thing at the end of the day. But
yeah,
um
yeah.
and it's funny, like kind of funny personal story. When this film came out, my parents had split up by then, and my mom found out that when my brother and I were at my dad's house, he let us watch this, and my mom has never been more furious in her life.
No
So
way.
I got a sort of soft spot for it just because like it was the forbidden movie.
But yeah, yeah. What, like, did nobody come in, or nobody sort of think, when there's all the ah, ah, going on? Did nobody like, call that into question in the house, Mary? Or were you just there like, ooh, let's,
I think that what it really boils down to is that neither of my parents were very good about filtering what films they let us watch and had differing opinions. So we ended up seeing everything one way or the other because pretty much like the only film my dad didn't want me to see growing up was There's Something About Mary, and my mom rented it. So, it just, there was no consistency whatsoever. We got to see everything.
Yeah, yeah. But actually, very interesting casting in that film. Talking about good actual British casts. There's a comedian in Something About Mary. Lee Evans. Lee Evans was cast in Something About Mary, and I thought that was
I
a
haven't
great bit
seen
of
that movie
cast.
in so long. Who did he play in that? Do you
He
remember?
was Tucker.
Tucker. Okay. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so Lee Evans is a great bit of casting in Something About Mary, and another great bit of actual British casting, Mary, is Richard E. Grant, who, of course, Americans may or may not know from With Nail and I and a host of other projects. But this was Richard E.
hmm
Grant being Richard E. Grant.
I love
Another,
Richard E. Grant. I remember him mostly as a kid from we had a copy of Hudson Hawk, which is a completely terrible, ridiculous movie that I love more than life itself, and he plays like a just really over the top crazy billionaire in that. So I love when he gets to just be Richard E. Grant,
yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah, and I think another interesting casting was, of course, Tom Waits,
mm.
which I think is fantastic, and probably my favorite bit of casting in here, because Tom Waits is just nuts. Anyway, his vocal
Oh
is
yeah.
great. His voice is just booming, and I think he plays, just plays the role of Dracula's servant, Dracula's kind of, almost like a host,
hmm
very, very well.
Yeah, I think would be like usually I think they call it like a vampire's thrall or something
That's the
like
one, the
that. Yeah.
thrall. Yeah,
That's the word we're looking for. Yeah, he's a great Renfield. I mean, and Tom Waits is just so comfortable with being weird and off-putting for the sake of art if he wants to. Like just great cast on him. And I also love those, I don't know what they're supposed to be, but those things on his hands in the movie, like the weird
yeah,
metal
yeah.
support things. I'm not sure if that's like a aesthetic choice or if those are supposed to be a real like medical device, but just such a like vibe the way they dressed him.
Yeah, there was throughout that asylum, there was the cages on the heads and stuff. So it was a really good aesthetic choice. As usual with the films we tend to feature here
Mhm.
on Morbid Movies, there is usually a very strong aesthetic, and it
You know,
was again gother than anything. Super goth, really. But the
there's
aesthetic is
something
great.
there's something very 90s about that aesthetic now. Like I wouldn't have, probably more than maybe like within the last few years realized it, but with enough distance, it's that kind of like cages on the head, sort of like almost industrial, edging towards steampunk kind of stuff. Just feels so of that era now to me.
Of course, yeah. Again, very much like Dark City, which we also covered. Very
hmm
much has that vibe in terms of that type of aesthetic. Also, I just want to shout to Anthony Hopkins as well as Van Helsing. Now, really, really good casting. I know there were other people considered for the role, but obviously, I think when Anthony Hopkins showed interest, he was almost just directly handed the role of Van
Oh,
Helsing.
absolutely. I mean, and he at that time was just coming off of having done Silence of the Lambs, so he was really kind of at his like peak powers at that point in terms of being able to pull a role that he wanted. I'm pretty sure it's like after that performance, I think he more or less can just like ask for something and get it. It feels like.
Yeah, absolutely. You make a very, very good point. There was some interesting. Obviously, you mentioned the horniness. I thought it was a little. I think the most weird moment was I think was it Anthony Hopkins getting a snog off Winona Ryder. That was a little odd, but I'm sure a great.
That's
You know,
that seems a weird one because I
yeah,
don't feel like it actually makes extreme amounts of sense or anything. But
no,
I kind of put it because I know a lot of the intention Coppola had for the film was to make the film kind of feel like you were just trapped in some kind of like erotic dream or nightmare. So I think you're allowed to suspend a little bit of logic. And I mean, there's also that implied like vampires do have a certain amount of supernatural seductive power. So
mm, mm.
but I always felt like of all people should have been a little bit more resistant to that trick instead of falling into it immediately.
I agree,
But
which is why I bring it up. I was like, come on, man, you're Van Helsing. Like, you chop off the three, no spoiler alert. You chop off the three heads, but then it's one of those things. You do show that strength later on, but after a nice snog from Winona. Anyway, very horny film.
Extremely.
You have been warned. One of the things I want to sort of touch on before we sort of do favorite facts for this film is the sort of subversion of the story. Obviously, taken heavy elements from the book, but it does paint Dracula excellently played, of course. In this film, it does kind of paint Dracula as the sympathetic villain, I think. Oldman does a great job of playing the character, of course, as he, did with most of his roles. Um, you know, but I think there is an undercurrent of sympathy for this, evil incarnate villain, and I think there's a wider question, Mary. We like to get deep on these podcasts about the problems with religion and the problems of relying on religion for strength and being let down. I don't know if you sympathized and empathized for for Dracula in this, for Oldman's Dracula, and how you feel about the religious connotations that sort of permeate this film.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, like, in the original novel, they never confirm that Dracula is Vlad the Impaler, but they just go ahead in the film and confirm that so that they're able to provide him with a backstory that's not in the novel. That has so I don't remember there. It's been a long time since I read it, but I don't remember there being much of a backstory for Dracula's origins in the novel itself. But they were able to use that as sort of a backdrop and supply that kind of, he fought for God and it was all for nothing kind of attitude that he had, because they integrated some pieces of the real Vlad the Impaler's biography, because he did have a wife who killed herself. So I thought it was an interesting way of incorporating an origin story using, loosely based in an actual historical figure. But I find it kind of nice that this film does do the more sympathetic, deeper dive into who is Dracula, because the original novel was really more built on what was kind of a common framing at the time, which was more of a these foreigners are coming and taking our women kind of fear, which I don't think resonated probably as much with anybody I mean, some people, but in the 90s, it's not really the same attitude of the unknown that people had in Victorian era, England. So changing it to be more of a love story and like really kind of also using that to explore like how women of that area were more sexually repressed, and then like in the presence of this vampire just really let loose was kind of an interesting angle to take with it as well.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I think we also just like in a lot of modern media just really like a sympathetic villain quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, everyone likes the villain, right? The villains are always more interesting, which is has been framed both positive and positive. You can frame that both positively and negatively. If it's a fictional story, I believe the villains are more interesting. But in real life, as we've talked about on this podcast and will do in future episodes, of course. There are villains hiding in plain sight, disguised as heroes quite regularly in most of, well, not most of pop culture, but a lot of pop culture. Yeah,
Absolutely. And I think it's one of those things where it's like you have to approach it correctly because, it's explanation more than excuse is how I like to look at it. Because it's like I sympathize for the things that make a person the way they are and cause them to, become a terrible person. But it's also still not an excuse for becoming that terrible person, if that makes sense. Like it's still wrong, but, I can sympathize with the steps that led a person to that
yeah,
point.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I guess it's just being aware of that and being like, okay, yeah, this person has done wrong, but if they show, remorse or empathy or whatever. I mean, obviously, like Oldman's Dracula here, it does terrible things, but you can understand why they start out that way, why that happens to them. But by the end, you know, they the character doesn't necessarily want to destroy the innocence of Winona Ryder's character. There is some remorse there, and we see that at the end where he gets to, spoiler alert again, effectively go to heaven with his deceased wife. You know, I guess he gets his happy ending, or that's what's implied.
Yeah, I mean, it's at least a resolution,
Yeah, yeah,
and it's
absolutely.
sort of a redemption for him to a certain point, I would say too, when he's finally just like, I don't want to do this anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the difference. Is if you do something wrong, going back to our point about real life villains and villains in popular culture, if you do something wrong, but you show remorse and you want to actually change and you actually make that change rather than just talking about it, I think that's where you can really, we can empathize with those characters.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, we could go on for hours about that. And, if you have any thoughts on that in the comments, of course, as we record this in January of 2025, feel free to chime in. A couple of my favorite facts now then, Mary, before we sort of wind it up. There's some really interesting stuff here that you researched before we went on record. Prince Vad's scream when he drives the sword into the cross is looks interior from the cramps, which I love. I thought that was a sufficiently goth fact.
I put that at the top because I knew you'd be excited about that one.
Yes, thank you. That was really, really cool. Like I mentioned, just to give some context to my earlier comment about the original casting of Van Helsing, it was actually Liam Neeson who went for the role of Van Helsing, but was turned down when Hopkins showed interest. Again, just giving sort of credence to your comment of just how powerful Anthony Hopkins was at that time.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things I read that too, and I'm thinking like, what would that have been like? Wish I could go back and see it both ways. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. One of the most interesting, if not the most interesting, was that Gary Oldman stayed in character during the entire shoot, which of course caused friction, most notably with Winona Ryder, who later on referred to it as some teen drama. But given the chemistry on camera. They look really good. Both of them look very good. They're telling this story, this kind of dark romance. I was actually interested to read that, but very interesting. I know Carrie Hills, who is also in, we've obviously covered him before as a performer on this channel. In previous episodes, he was saying that Ullman purposefully kept himself distant from the rest of the cast. Your thoughts on that fact, and I guess method acting, if we want to go wide and vast with this episode. What do you think about that?
It's interesting. I don't. I'm torn on method actings. I find it to be, interesting in the abstract, but I know it's frequently difficult for the other performers working on a performance when someone does that. And and I've seen some actors say, if you're an actor, you should just be able to act. But it seems like for some people, method is just makes them stay in character better, and it's really hard to argue with the results that Gary Oldman gets because he's so good. Like I don't think I've ever seen a bad Gary Oldman performance.
No, I don't think so either. Now that I think about it.
And I think some of that was also, like, to a certain degree, it's Oldman, but some of it was also Coppola, because when I was reading about, I don't think I included it in my notes because I was reading some more later, but the way they had the accommodation set up, all of the actors who were going to be vampire hunters were lodged together, and he sort of grouped the way that they were put into houses specifically so that they would bond for the film. And Gary Oldman was kept. Oh, he didn't stay in the same place as the rest of the cast, so I think that some of that was also intentional on Coppola's part, just to give him that alienation as well. So I think it's a testament to how professional they are that you read about how Winona Ryder and Gary Oldman had conflict on set, but it doesn't show in their performance. They're very believable together. And I imagine it would have to be very difficult to do that kind of acting with someone that you're actively pissed at the moment. So
yeah, absolutely.
Really, real testament to the skill both of them have, especially I'm not sure how old she was, but Ryder herself has said she was pretty young when she did that film. So, obviously she'd been acting, since she was a child, but, just still very, very good performances on both of their parts.
Absolutely. And before we sort of wind up and I get you to give your favorite facts on this film, I think it's particularly interesting as well the legacy that this film has had. You mentioned obviously Interview with the Vampire, one of your favorites, of course. You talk about in your facts and research What We Do in the Shadows, which I still haven't seen, which I need to see. And I've seen a little bit. I've seen a little bit of the series, but other things as well have taken from this. I wonder if I could get your thoughts on the legacy of this film, Mary?
Oh yeah, I mean it's got a huge legacy. I mean it's because like a lot of like the Dracula Dead and Loving It spoof that Mel Brooks made, which I think was only a couple years later, drew heavily from this film, especially making fun of the kind of like interesting costume choices, like the wig when Dracula's in his older form and things like that, and just a lot of the pacing and structure of the film was drawn from that. And obviously, like you said too, Interview with the Vampire took a lot of its influence from that. It says I had a here. Let me just read the director for Interview with the Vampire, Neil Jordan, actually had a quote that I kept because I thought it was cool. Because he said, up to that point, Francis Ford Coppola with Bram Stoker's Dracula, he introduced opulence and theatricality. Normally, before that one, I always thought of vampire movies as cheap, cobbled together, brilliant use of minimal resources. Francis made this epic, didn't he? So when I was given the opportunity to make Interview with the Vampire, I thought, oh, it would be really great to expand on that epic sense of darkness and to give these characters huge kind of romantic destinies and longings and feelings. And I mean, and he definitely nailed that in Interview with the Vampire. So a huge effect on that. But there was also like in the 90s at that time, I feel like this was at the beginning there was kind of a vampire film boom as well. And I think that the amount of money that this film made in the box office, which was absolutely huge, like played a pretty large role in everyone else going, oh, let's make a vampire movie. Because in addition to this, an Interview with the Vampire, you get like the Blade series kicking off at that point in time, and then Dracula Dead and Loving It, and then like Vampire in Brooklyn, the Eddie Murphy one, which is another comedy one. There was just, and I know there's more than that even, but there was just a lot of vampire films at that point in time, and I feel like this was a huge piece of that.
Perfect for mega goths like us. Obviously, you introduced me to a lot of really cool stuff, which we've talked about on this podcast. Again, musically as well. I thought the soundtrack was great. I thought it really set the mood for some of those more intense scenes. This has everything. This has man bats, giant man bats. This has like Oldman turns into a body of rats, for example. This has all the goth cliches. So I hope that this does appeal. If you've not watched it, go and watch this. Is there something, before I get you to give me your favorite fact and wind us down, is there such a thing as too campy and too horny, Mary?
I mean,
was this it?
This really flirts with the edge, but I think overall, I think that they managed to pull it off. I think that its enduring popularity as well as its, box office performance at the time are evidence of that. Like, it's crazy and over the top and camp, but in all the very best ways. And a lot of that probably comes down to like just very intelligent use of their costume design and their budget for sets and actually making it look good on top of being so crazy, because I feel like it would be easy to do this film wrong.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, and there's been plenty of poor vampire films. Again, might be an interesting comment for the people watching. What's your worst vampire film of all time? Do let us know.
Oh man, maybe we should do that. Like maybe once a year, we just do like the worst film we can find. Hurt ourselves.
yeah, absolutely. There'll be some terrible ones out there. Feel free to drop your suggestions. We of course couldn't do this without you and your engagement. Feel free to drop some suggestions for us to cover. Thank you all for your support of this channel. But Mary, your favorite fact, because you did a lot of research for this episode, your favorite fact, please, about this film, obscure fact that you think people will be interested in, and where can people find us and all that stuff as we wind down.
Right. Well, I think that one of the things that I do find most interesting about this film is that Coppola was very aware when making this of the what is the word I'm looking for? He was very aware that this is set in the same period of time that really is the origin of film. This is when the first, silent movies were being made and things like that. And he went out of his way to not use modern like computerized special effects, and pretty much everything in the film is practical effects or just like camera tricks, which I absolutely love. That, and then sometimes there's shots where it's like there's like a shot in London that opens in black and white and has that jerky silent film motion to it before it transitions into being just more smooth film. Like there's quite a bit of that, and you can see it also in the homages. Like a lot of the work that was done with the shadows imposed over people and things like that very much reminds me of the kind of shadows you see in Nosferatu, the original silent film.
Cool.
So he made use of quite a lot of older vampire film, you know, not just like tropes, but also visual effects and things like that. And I think it gives it a good feel. I'm a little bit skeptical of CGI in general, or overuse of it rather. So I appreciated the beauty of making it work with all practical effects, especially since like some of them, like the, you know, figure of rats that collapses and things like that can't possibly have been very easy to achieve.
No, absolutely. You know, and a great tribute to the original novel, and a great dramatization, and tribute, of course, to again those films you mentioned, Nosferatu. Again, there's some really cool effects, like you mentioned. There's the graveyard scene where the camera shakes, and it is basically a guy shaking a camera, but it works in the context of the film. You know, campy and over the top and horny, as we say, in this context is good and it works, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Just like really like just beautifully done film, especially if you like things that are a little bit crazy and over the top. And I kind of feel like there you can feel there's a lot of love for that. Is that something like the Coppola family has made so many vampire films, like especially like Nicolas Cage has been involved in a few, like Shadow of the Vampire he produced, and the Renfield one where he played Dracula recently, and there's more, I think, that nephews of Coppola's that made other films. So it's like I think that the family just really loves vampires quite a bit from what I can tell. So it's like you can feel that kind of like interest and passion come through with the attention to detail.
absolutely. And that's why we wanted to cover this film, bring it to you guys. We have a passion for all things dark and gloomy, vampiric, and clearly campy and horny. Yes, Mary, what is next for Morbid Movies, if you could tell us, and
Okay.
where can people find us?
Okay, well, let's start with where people can find us because I've got that in front of me. So you can email us at morbidmoviespod@gmail.com. We are on Instagram at Morbid Movies Podcast, on Twitter at Morbid Movies Pod. We have a TikTok account, but I do not have access to it anymore. That's morbid.movies.pod for those outside the United States. And on Blue Sky, we are Morbid Movies. And in terms of what we are doing next,
Let us
hmm.
know. Let us know what you fancy. If you guys have any ideas, because clearly we do not. No, I'm kidding, Mary. You know exactly. You've got the big list. Yeah. Let us know what you guys want us to do in the comments, and of course, me and Mary will convene. We will properly prepare for the next episode and come back to you in a month's time with some more stuff. We also have some short content going up with some debates on some people. We will get those to you shortly. Thank you so much for watching. Mary, I'm going to give you the final word.
Okay. Oh, I get the final word. Well, I just want to say thank you to everyone watching. And, definitely if you haven't seen it, go check out Dracula because it's a great movie. And, obviously, everything Dom said, let us know how you think things are going. Let us know what you want to cover. And I appreciate everybody sticking with us, as we get our footing here and develop this podcast more.
Yeah, see you guys soon. Take it easy.
Bye.
Bye.